like button when you come into the live stream. By hitting that like button, the YouTube algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to join in, and it's always more fun when we have more people joining in on the comment section, asking us interesting questions and coming up with their great comments. Now, talking about the Federal Reserve's rate cuts, this is what the subject of today's video is going to be. And this is not a surprise that they had cut rates. It's pretty much been signaled out there to the mainstream, through the mainstream media, to all the different channels of communication, that the markets are to understand that the Federal Reserve was going to be cutting rates. That way they can condition themselves for the rate cuts, and that way there's no shock and awe event. Everything is already in position to deal with the cuts that are taking place. So when the Federal Reserve is conducting their monetary policy, it is very, very important for them to communicate it out there well in advance what it is that they plan on doing. Now, if you remember back, like a lot of times it's easy to forget, especially if you're not like really like hyper focused in on monetary policy or the Federal Reserve or interest rates or anything. But at the end of last year, the dot plot, right, what this is like the Federal Reserve's projection of where interest rates were going to go, had an amazing amount of cuts to it. It was like, I can't remember exactly what it was, but at one point they were predicting like, I think 7 rate cuts or something coming in 2024. We experienced what, like 3, right? 3 rate cuts at 50 basis points and then another 2 quarter-point rate cuts. And although, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it is, you know, is significant. I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say it's like, you know, dropping it down to 0 or something like that on the Fed funds rate, but, you know, lowering interest rates, you know, a whole point or a whole percentage point over the course of a year, or even just a handful of months, it does have an impact on the economy. But we have to think, like, it takes time. Like, there's a lag period from the time that they cut to the time that it actually impacts the economy, and that's anywhere from 6 months to a year. And so when we think about interest rate cuts, or the rate cuts that have taken place already within the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, they really haven't even impacted the economy as of yet, right? I mean, they might be just initially starting to impact the economy, but for the most part, it's still going to be a few months down the road before we get the initial effects of those rate cuts. And then even then, we're still going to be in a fairly restrictive level, because that's where the Federal Reserve is still sitting today. Like, it's not accommodating to drop interest rates. Like, a lot of people put that in their mind, that because the Federal Reserve is lowering interest rates, that is being stimulating, right? But it's not. It's being less restrictive. And that's important to understand, because a lot of times when we take this consideration that the Fed is lowering rates, we also take in this consideration that they must be doing money printing and they're expanding, you know, operations and causing all the problems out there. And that's really like kind of a misunderstanding of what it is that the Federal Reserve is attempting to do right now, because more what they are attempting to do is trying to get that Fed funds rate to a neutral stance, where they're neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. Here's the problem that they are facing, is that there's an inflationary scenario or an expectation that is elevated going into 2025. So as people are anticipating that the Trump administration is going to be firing off all these tariffs and creating a situation in which that we have an inflationary scenario, that inflation expectation within itself is beginning to raise the neutral interest rate. Because an inflation expectation is somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. People will begin to behave in a way as if they are anticipating that inflation, knowing it's going to come, and then creating the inflation, creating it in itself, right? So this is really where I think the Federal Reserve is kind of standing back with the idea, thinking, okay, well, we're only going to have a couple of rate cuts going into 2025, like literally 2, I think is what they said in the dot plot. I left a link down in the description to an article. But I don't believe the dot plot. Like, I don't believe those future projections of where it is that they say they're going to go with their interest rates, because if you had listened to them back at the end of last year, like a lot of people had, then you would have believed that they would have had interest rates almost near 0 today. They hardly lowered rates at all. Like, I mean, they did some, but not nearly what it is that people had anticipated back at the end of 2023, right? And so when we think about what it is that the Federal Reserve is communicating right now, a lot of times people are thinking, oh man, they're going to be backing out on their rate cuts, right? They're not going to be doing as many of them. Well, then think about what it is that's going on within the mind of the people out there. that puts in an inflation expectation right into the economy, right? The Federal Reserve is not going to be lowering rates because the inflationary scenario is going to come. Therefore, I start conducting myself in a way that protects me from the inflationary scenario, which actually creates the inflationary scenario. Right? I know this is like a lot of times it's really backwards for a lot of people to think about, but it really does go down in such fashions. And so if they can put this expectation into the people that there is going to be an inflationary scenario, regardless of what happens out there, the people conduct themselves in that way. If we do have an expanding operation of inflationary pressures of that of like tariffs or slowdown in manufacturing or recessionary things that are happening, that creates a scenario in which that the Federal Reserve would be forced into dropping rates in order to stimulate the economy. That would come due to the fact that we have a labor market that is suffering, like unemployment is beginning to rise, people are losing their jobs. If this is the situation that comes in 2025, then I think the Federal Reserve would be conducting themselves a whole lot differently than what they are projecting right now. Like what they are anticipating is that everybody's going to have a job, right, going into 2025. Like although layoffs are rising and unemployment is ticking up some, it's still historically low considering what the Federal Reserve would be looking at on a long-term basis. So they're not terribly concerned about the labor market. And if you have inflation that is persistently above that 2% target, well, then they'd be like, hey, we got to keep these interest rates elevated because we got this inflationary scenario that just can't quite be beat, right? And so here you got the Federal Reserve now sitting in a position that says, well, you have a job and we're not beating inflation, so we can't bring interest rates down, right? Because we have to deal with the fact that we have this inflationary scenario. And if you have a job, then we're not going to lower rates. So this is really how it's being communicated out there, although the people don't receive it that way. But this is really what's being communicated out there from the Federal Reserve when it comes into what's taken place in 2025. Now, ultimately, this is what I believe the Federal Reserve is truly doing with their monetary policy strategy. Now, you're probably not going to find this anywhere out there on a mainstream media article or interview, or even another YouTuber out there probably won't explain it this way. But this is what the Federal Reserve is really trying to do, is that the Federal Reserve is in a position in which that trying to maintain their ability to stimulate the economy when it comes to a downturn in economic activity, like mainly a recession, that Fed funds rate, the Federal Reserve interest rate setting policy, is their main tool. Like that's what everybody would be looking at to try and stimulate the economy. So lowering this rate would then give the ability for businesses to go out there, borrow money, invest into their company, hiring people themselves would have cheaper access to credit, be able to be a consumer of cars and houses and vacations and all that other stuff. This is kind of the mindset of the people in the economy and the general idea of what economists look at the Federal Reserve doing when they're lowering interest rates. Here's the problem that the Federal Reserve is facing, is that neutral interest rate we were talking about earlier is still fairly low. Like it's, they think it's rising. They don't know exactly. It had estimates of somewhere around 2.5% back during COVID or prior to COVID. They think that it might have moved up to 3.5%. They're not exactly sure. Time will tell on that. However, the Federal Reserve being able to stimulate the economy would have to drop those rates, those Fed funds rate, far enough below neutral to create the stimulating effect. This is really important to understand, because if the neutral interest rate is low and the Fed takes the Fed funds rate back to zero, it may not be enough to actually create the stimulating effect into the economy. This is why the Federal Reserve is so persistently maintaining the idea of going for an inflation rate that is moderately above 2%. They don't communicate that, again, out there to the mainstream media. It is communicated through their speeches, right? Again, but not necessarily communicated out there to the mainstream media, but that they are shooting for this moderately above 2%. on the inflationary scenario. If the people's expectation gets locked in, it's like, dang, man, this inflation is moderately, is this slightly above 2%, very persistent, stubborn, won't come down, the inflation expectation will raise the neutral interest rate. So now the Federal Reserve can literally sit on their hands. They don't have to do anything so long as the inflation expectation scenario is very persistent within the economy. It will raise that neutral interest rate ever closer to the Fed funds rate, making their economic monetary policy less restrictive. This is, again, very important to look at because most people will not communicate this out there to you. Most mainstream articles have no clue, don't even bring up the neutral interest rate. Occasionally you'll find it. Hardly any other economist out there believe that the Federal Reserve is actually attempting to go for a inflation rate that is above 2%, that they are going for that. They are trying to be moderately above 2% for some time. And so again, this is stuff that I have tried to communicate out there. I've got shown plenty of evidence through all the speeches and documents and everything that this is what they're attempting to do. And so when we think about how it is that the Federal Reserve is going to communicate this out there to the future, if it's the credible threat itself of them moving rates in one particular direction or another, your understanding of that and what it is that you do to conduct yourself going into the future will be profoundly impacted by that communication. Right? So if you believe that there's going to be less cuts coming in 2025, then you will conduct yourself in a way that says, man, these interest rates are going to remain elevated. I have to either position my money to take advantage of those elevated interest rates, or I have to save in a particular direction, or I have to invest in this particular way. You will start incorporating this idea of there being less rate cuts going into the future with an elevated inflation expectation. It does not mean that the Federal Reserve will only do 2 rate cuts. They may do a whole lot more. Unemployment starts to rise dramatically. They will be forced through their dual mandate to do something about creating an expansionary economy in order to get the businesses out there to start hiring people again. That's what they would be forced into doing. But if you have low unemployment or historically low unemployment, or at least the labor market is not suffering in a way that says the Federal Reserve is not achieving that part of their dual mandate, then there's no reason for them to lower rates. There just isn't any. And if they can get that inflation expectation elevated and keep it elevated, the neutral interest rate will ever increasingly move closer to the Fed funds rate, making the economy less restricted. Not only that, if it does move in that particular direction, what if, right? Because this is like what seems to be happening within the economy, the elevated inflation expectations and the rising of that neutral interest rate. If we get to a point in which we do have a downturn, the Federal Reserve will be able to fire off their typical monetary policy tool by lowering the interest rates, the Fed funds rates to 0, being significantly below that neutral interest rate, which would actually stimulate the economy. That's what I believe that the Federal Reserve is up to. Like, most people are looking at it like the Federal Reserve doesn't know what they're doing, or that they failed, or that they can't control the inflation or anything else like that. And in my mind, I'm thinking, man, that totally leads in that sort of belief of understanding of what it is that's going on within the economy, that the Fed screwed up, that they can't hold on to inflation, that it's running away from them, that it's, all that stuff. That actually is a benefit to the Federal Reserve. See, they needed an inflation expectation that was persistently too high rather than too low. Too low, they couldn't conduct their monetary policy. It wasn't working for them anymore. That's one of the reasons why you saw so much government spending taking place during the recession, is because the typical way that the Federal Reserve would try and stimulate the economy during a recession wasn't going to work. They can't lower rates any further than 0. That's it. They're done. Right? They're out of the ammo. They're out of the game. It's no longer going to work. So the government steps in and says, hey, we're going to do a whole ton of borrowing, and we're going to just spend that into the economy, stimulus checks, government projects, all kinds of stuff. So as the fiscal policy coming from the government itself, that was the spender in the economy when the Federal Reserve was trying to stimulate by lowering rates to 0. Because typically, when they lowered rates, we would borrow the money. Businesses would borrow the money. They would go out there, spend that money, and then this would be the the driver of the economy, increasing the aggregate demand. But they knew during COVID, and they actually knew it during the great financial crisis as well, that lowering rates to zero wasn't going to be the effective tool like it once did. Nobody really knows that. Right? That's also kind of important to understand. Nobody really knows that's the case. And so when they see the Federal Reserve lower rates to zero and then the money printer goes off, in their mind, this is an inflationary scenario. Just look at all the money printing going off. Money printer go burr, prices go up. What how hard is that to understand? The problem with that belief is that if you go back to the great financial crisis, quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed to produce the inflationary scenario that the Federal Reserve was looking for. And so when people say, hey, the money printer go off, how hard is it to understand that the prices are going to go up? It's very difficult for those people to explain how come it is that the expansion of the balance sheet from $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion failed to produce the inflationary scenario after the great financial crisis. So once we start to understand that it was supply chain breakdown that really created the inflationary scenario that we had seen, and I'm not saying it wasn't all the stimulus and money printing and all that other stuff, that definitely was part of it as well. But if you just took that into consideration, then you wouldn't be able to explain what happened during the great financial crisis. So right now, here we have quantitative tightening taking place. Quantitative tightening, they're pulling money out of the system. Literally pulling money out of the system, but yet we have an inflationary expectation that's coming. And it was just like, wait a minute, these two are working opposite of each other. Money printer go off, prices go up. But money printer is going into the opposite direction. It's actually on suck, right? Sucking money out of the economy. And yet here we have this idea that there's going to be inflationary pressures coming to the future. It was just like quite opposite of the money printer idea, right? But it makes sense when you think, tariffs and supply chain breakdowns. That makes a lot of sense, right? Supply demand imbalances. That's not hard to understand, but yet it is difficult for people to then try put that into their scenario or their mind in their scenario of thinking that money printer is what's causing the prices to go up. And once you kind of set that aside and you look at it from a different picture of money printing and Federal Reserve efforts in monetary policy is all about creating aggregate demand. That's what it's all about. Getting people to go out there and spend their money. Now, whether you go and you borrow it on a credit card or a mortgage or something of that nature, or if a business goes out there and starts to borrow money and hiring people, one way or the other, you're getting access to money. Now, if you have more people working, more people consuming, supply-demand imbalances start to take place. This is really where the Federal Reserve was looking for their inflationary pressures when they would typically conduct themselves, but that doesn't work anymore. See, they found that there is an insensitivity, a tight labor market is showing insensitivity to inflation, or inflation is showing an insensitivity to a tight labor market. That's the way to say it, I'm sorry. This is the way the Federal Reserve says it. So when you had the historically low unemployment, all like towards the end, even like a few years towards the end of the Obama administration, pretty much all the way through the Trump administration, this would have been an inflationary expectation from the Federal Reserve. Excuse me. Like the Federal Reserve would have had an inflation expectation from the low unemployment, the historically low unemployment. But they didn't get the inflation expectation that they were looking for. Like they were like, oh my gosh, here we have unemployment historically low, and yet we still did not get an inflationary scenario because of it. So they know that monetary policy that they were working with, lowering of interest rates, won't stimulate the economy, even if they took it to zero, because they would not be significantly below the neutral interest rate. And having a whole bunch of people working, historically low unemployment, still won't create an inflationary scenario. The only thing that will create the inflationary scenario is your actual expectations of a higher inflation and supply chain breakdowns. That creates the inflationary scenario, one that actually impacts the economy in a profound way that then has people going, man, what am I going to do about this? Right? Because up until the COVID breakdown, money printer wasn't going to do it anymore. And so again, as we look at what it is that the Federal Reserve is communicating out there, it's important to understand that communication and how it is that you are taking that information in, and the reasons that or the meanings that you're giving that information. This is how the Federal Reserve is controlling it. Right? They are masters at gaslighting. Like, they figured out the best way to do it in I don't even know how to, like, mass psyops form. And literally it comes down to people believing that they're going for a 2% target, as opposed to moderately above 2% for some time, with an average inflation rate that has no mathematical formula for figuring it out. Okay, guys, I just kind of rambled on here enough. Let's go check out this super chat. We're probably only going to go for another 10 minutes and we're going to call it good. Just Cause. Thanks for the $5, Wayne. I really appreciate you, man. All right, let's cruise down here towards the bottom. We got so many people up in here. We got All Nighter Smoke That, thumbs up like Cheech and Chong while I get back to the job site. All right. Dixter says, taters taste like chicken. Okay. All right. This is all your fault, America. Stop blaming others. It's all you. Well, way to put your problems on an external like that, but whatever. Neil's like that. You like that silver or platinum crystallized osmium. I don't even know what that crystallized osmium is. I gotta look that stuff up. So this is the suffering part. The suffering part is really going to be going into the future in a consistent way. Like, there is no more end. I think the problem that some people see is that they believe that the further we get away from the ability to acquire the American dream, that's the suffering, right? Like being able to get a house, get a car, get the retirement, have the vacations, all the wonderful things that, typically would be in our minds from working hard, right? So this is where the suffering comes in, is because no matter what we do going into the future, our jobs, our 9-to-5 jobs, will never cut it. It will never, like, there's going to be some areas and there's some people who are going to be incredibly disciplined who might be able to figure it out with their 9-to-5 jobs, but for the most part, everybody else is going to be suffering in the problem that the inequality that is taking place right now doesn't allow for the wages that we are receiving to get ourselves on the other side of that wedge. This is the problem that we are now facing. There are people who can do it. You have to be incredibly disciplined. Do not spend any money on anything that's enjoyable or anything like that, and invest everything you can. Try to get into being a capitalist or property owner. We've talked about this a lot of times. But this is the problem that we are now facing going into the future, is that working class wages which would typically bring us the ability to acquire the American dream idea, the house, the car, the vacations kind of stuff, that is going to get incredibly difficult going into the future. Now, with saying that, it's not like it's impossible to get on the other side of the wedge, but we have to also understand that the 9-to-5 job is not going to be enough. And this is where I think a lot of times we start finding that these side gigs or side hustles or online, jobs that a lot of people can do through sales or however, there's a million ways to make money nowadays. All these little sideways, and it doesn't even have to be that much, just some, right? You get this some extra income beyond what it is you already make is extra, right? So you get this other income is what I guess I should say. This is becoming more available to the people. Right? And in a way that is a lot easier than I think people give it credit for. And if it's fairly easy to do this, like, you have to build it, so it takes time, right? You have to, figure out how to build up a YouTube channel, build up an online store, whatever it is that you're doing. You have to build these things together. But once you start to build those, you can not only work a 9-to-5 job, but then you can also have these other side hustles, which then now gives you the ability, through the new money that you are acquiring, to then put into the position in which that makes you the capitalist or the property owner or whatever it is that's going on in there in your world that you want. But that's where I think the suffering is going to come in, is that most people don't know to do that. Like, they just want to get the 9-to-5 job, work 8 hours a day, say, damn, I put in all this excellence for 8 hours, and at 5 o'clock, it's now me time, cracking beers, watching games, hanging out, doing whatever, but not necessarily pursuing more excellence. This is the problem that we are going to face. This is where the suffering is going to come in. And most people don't realize it because they think, no, I worked hard all day. And it's like, yeah, you did. And there was a time that that kind of effort would have been enough to get you a house and a car and the vacation and do all that other stuff. But today, because of the separation and the inequality and all the new money that's come in that's done this, you're going to have to figure out a way to get extra new money, whatever extra is, right? You have to get other new money because you have to keep up with all the rest of the people out there who are now separating themselves from the working class because of all the new money that's come in. They've acquired it. Right? You think about it, it's like new money comes in. If you give it to the poor and then there's still poor people out there, what happened to the money, right? They spent it. It went to the top, right? It's just like if they don't have it anymore, it went somewhere. And this is where I think a lot of times when people think, okay, well, we could have government action or some sort of effort in this direction to pump this money into the lower classes or something of that nature. The moment that they get it, they start conducting themselves in a way that then sends that money right back up to the rich. So every time government starts to step in to help the poor people, even if they're ignoring the rich, they're like, hey man, we don't want to deal with the rich, we're only going to deal with the poor, give this to the poor. All that money generally funnels right back up to the rich. And then the separation grows even worse. So this is where the suffering is going to be taking place going into the future. Is that the normal 9-to-5 job that people say, hey man, I work very hard at, it's just not going to be enough. A good job sucks. And that's just this is the unfortunate consequence of it. Now, if you want to see the Federal Reserve lowering rates, and somehow lowering rates is easing the pain, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I guess some people might see it that way, and that they're not in a restrictive economy, but in a stimulating economy. So this idea of the Federal Reserve lowering rates to be less painful or to not force the people into suffering, I think this is like a very misunderstood way of looking at it and thinking that this is going to be a benefit, because really what has taken place when the Federal Reserve does something like that, it is going to mean that the economy is probably deteriorated, meaning you don't have a job anyway. And so when it comes to the Federal Reserve wanting to lower rates, the only reason why they would want to lower rates is if all the people are massively unemployed. That's when they would want to lower rates. So as people are wishing and hoping and dreaming that the Federal Reserve does lower rates and get more into a stimulating economy, they are really asking for themselves to be out of work, right? Because that's what it's going to take. What time is it? Alrighty, guys, I got like a few more minutes here and then I got to go. Jerome has destroyed my trading account. Uh-oh. How much a woodchuck would chuck if a chuck would chuck? I don't think he did that right. All right, don't keep all your money in one trading account, in your trading account. You know? Keep hitting the like, please. Yes, please do. All right. If your employer cut your year-end bonus by 44% compared to last year, how would you stay positive about that? It's hard not to be angry, but I know it's not my company at the end of the day. Well, I mean, I think everybody has kind of like expectations of what they are going to get from their work. And if you had gotten bonuses and, every single year, then yeah, you can't help but to think that you're probably going to get another bonus. And then if you have that sliced in half, then yeah, that's probably a pretty big hit to somebody who had a higher expectation of it. But I think this is really where where most people end up suffering a lot in their life. And it doesn't necessarily mean just from the pay. It can be anything out there. It could be anything. It doesn't matter if it's a bonus from your job. If you put an expectation on an external and then it doesn't happen and that damages you, then this is the problem that you are facing as you're putting externals, like you're putting importance on an external out there. And although sometimes you have to take those chances out there in order to move on with projects and business and stuff, it's these expectations of what it is that you have on an external that doesn't come through that then damages your idea of what it was that was supposed to be for the future. Like it hurts your ego, essentially, right? Because the ego always wants to be right. And if you're like, no, I have this thing coming to me in a couple of weeks, and then it doesn't happen, that expectation is says, right? And now, or, has your ego getting all mad about it. So, although it's like when it comes to pay, it's hard to do that, to like say, hey man, I'm going to let go of the, of the external, I'm going to let go of, the expectations and all this other stuff. And whether I get it or don't get it, it's no big deal. It's not going to change my life any. It's hard to conduct yourself in this fashion. But ultimately, when you do, you open up the ability for all kinds of stuff to come in because you don't put up resistance. And I know this is kind of really flying off of what we were talking about originally, but this is when taking in information, this is what I've learned from all the stuff on my YouTube channel or doing this YouTube channel, is that the more of an expectation I had on the external, the more pain and suffering I would experience from it. Okay? And the more that I would let go of the expectation of what's taking place out there and just allow things to be the way they are, regardless if I liked it or approved it or whatever, didn't matter what I wanted in my life, just, put forth the effort that I believe that I needed to do with my life to chase excellence, and then allow whatever is going to happen, right? And if I got paid, cool. If I didn't get paid, hey, no big deal, whatever, just keep going for it. And I found that the more I did that, the more I would find that money would flow, or things of abundance type of, like, because I don't necessarily just think of money, right? I think of like being invited down to go to these speaking engagements. That to me is like in the abundance. To be able to go out there and share my thoughts and ideas on stage and be invited to do that. Like, to me, that is amazing. Those events that I had done, I didn't pursue them. They showed up. Right? Had I pursued them, I probably wouldn't have gotten them. If I had pursued anything out there, then I would probably have put up resistance towards it. And the fact that I know that the effort that I am putting out today is going to not only benefit the people that I'm sharing it with, but at some point it will flow back to me. It'll benefit me. Whether it happens with monetary on this particular video, maybe not. But I might have shared some ideas and thoughts with somebody on this video who will then make contact with me later on saying, hey man, I really appreciate it. Have you ever communicated with this person? Or have you ever done this? Right? Because that's really how it goes down. Meeting George Gammon came literally from a comment on a previous video that I had done. Says, hey, go check out George Gammon. He's a cool guy. I went and checked out George Gammon. He was a cool guy. Gave him a shout out. He was really happy with the idea that I gave him a shout out. He contacted me. We're kind of like friends now. Like, it was amazing on how that happened. I didn't put that effort out there to try and do it, to try and meet George. I didn't care. At the time, I didn't have that sort of care in my mind that I was like, hey, I want to meet George Gammon. I'm going to give him a shout out and hopefully he is appreciative of that. I didn't think that. Right? Not at all. And so I just kind of let go of everything out there as much as I can. And it's hard. It's really difficult to do that. But the more I let go, the more I find that what it is that I'm looking for starts flowing towards me. And when it does show up, it shows up in the most oddest directions, ways that I never thought it would have come. Like I would have expected, hey, it needs to show up in this particular direction, this fashion. But then all of a sudden it comes in this other way. And it's like, wow, I didn't see that coming. That's the way this works. And our ego has a terrible time dealing with that because we want to lay it out in importance. No, it's going to happen this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, goal, right? And that's the way we look at it. But it's unfortunate for most people to live that because they end up suffering in disappointment from this desire. And that's really what it comes down to. It's okay to have desires, right? But if you put so much importance and effort and time and energy into this desire and it doesn't take place, you will find that you will be incredibly disappointed and miserable because of that. Right? Release the desire. Like, you can have it, put it in your imagination. Hey, that would be great. What it would feel like to have $1 million, Okay, let's think about what it would feel like. What would a millionaire do if he had $1 million? Since you want to be a millionaire, what would a millionaire do? If a millionaire woke up in the morning, what would they do? What would they have for breakfast? What would they be working on? Who would they be communicating with? What would they be doing every single day? Do that. Live in that energy. Be that. Like, people say, no, a millionaire would be buying a bunch of stuff. No, millionaires don't be buying a bunch of stuff. Like, they can buy a bunch of stuff. Millionaires are millionaires because they worked hard to become a millionaire. They lived in an energy that got them to being a millionaire. Being a millionaire isn't even that much money anymore. This is like, before it used to be a big deal. Now it's just like everybody's a millionaire. Alrighty, guys, what time is it? I got to go. You've been awesome. We got 220 people watching with 80 likes. Thank you so much for hitting that like button. We got a $5 super chat because you guys are always so generous with them super chats and supporting the Uneducated Economist. You can support the Uneducated Economist by becoming a member of the channel. Joining the channel costs $1 a month. You'll have access to all kinds of member-only videos where we have broken down monetary policy speeches from the Federal Reserve and all kinds of other documents and information that is not really shared much else on YouTube or anywhere else. So it's quite unique, and it's a great place to go for information. But again, it's $1 a month, and it's a great way to support the Uneducated Economist. There's also an affiliate link to Amazon, an Amazon affiliate link to the Cantillon essay. A lot of you know that I refer back to the Cantillon essay quite a bit. So there's an Amazon affiliate link to that Cantillon essay where you can go and buy it. You do not have to buy that essay off of Amazon. You can get it for free at the Mises Institute. So just go and type into Google search Cantillon essay on economic theory. You should be able to find that right away at the Mises Institute. You can download that PDF for free and then read the whole document. It's a great, great essay for understanding some of the economic forces that have been described literally hundreds of years ago. You can see them playing out today when you read that essay. And then also, since it's, again, getting closer to Christmas and most people have probably already done their shopping, however, anything that you purchase after you have clicked on that Amazon affiliate link down in the description of this video, anything you put in that cart and purchase within the next 30 days, I will also get a little commission on. So just go and buy whatever you normally would off of Amazon anyway. Just follow that affiliate link first, and again, I will get a little commission off of that. Getting excited to go to Vegas in February, so let that be known out there that I will be going to Mike Zuber's One Rental at a Time in the middle of February in Vegas, so that's going to be quite exciting. I'm looking forward to that. And also, just to kind of give you a little bit of a personal one here, I had done my first rehearsal for the play that I am going to be in here. I think it starts in about 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks, the show. So if you happen to be in the Astoria area or, whatever, Portland area, even if you wanted to come travel to the coast, I will be in a play. It's called Out at Sea, and that will be, I think the show starts, like I said, in about 4 or 5 weeks, but I'll give you guys updates and posts on that. So anyway, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.